Hello, welcome to Uncut with Lucia. Today, I'm so excited to speak with Peter Spitz. Peter is an inventor and author whose remarkable journey began when he immigrated to the US from Austria in 1939. His latest book, Reflecting on History, How the Industrial Revolution Created Our Way of Life, offers a compelling exploration of how historical inventions have influenced our modern world. So, Peter, welcome to Uncut with Lucia.
Well, thank you for having me, and I think this is a very exciting thing for me as well. So, whatever question you want to ask and whatever information I can provide, just go ahead. I'm here.
Wonderful. So, Peter, before it's a pleasure, of course, to have you on the show. And to start off, if you could collaborate with any historical inventor or scientist, who would it be?
Well, there are so many of them. You have to go through my mind. But I think and you're talking about a specific person, or you're not? Not a general inventor. So I would say probably the most interesting inventor would be Michael Faraday, who made most of the inventions that we use in the field of electricity. I mean, there are so many others, but if I had to pick one, probably is the most important one that gives the most background and information and utility in their invention to the things that we use every day and that industry uses every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's Michael Faraday, and he was British, and he received all kinds of prizes. I'm not even sure whether he got the Nobel Prize or not. In fact, I'm sure he didn't, because the Nobel Prize didn't exist at the time that he made these inventions. But he was nominated to all kinds of honors by the British Academy and all the other societies. So it would be Michael Faraday.
Okay, good to know. Yes, there are many, many inventors. And when we turn on the television, use a computer, heat something in a microwave, open the refrigerator, or even drive a car, take an antibiotic, we often.
You must have read my book to come up with these items.
Yes, I was checking your book, and we take it for granted. We think everything is so easy, but it was not always like this. So, can you highlight a specific invention from that era that had a profound impact on modern life?
Well, there are so many, it's hard to just pick out one, and that I don't want to repeat electricity because we've already covered that. Um, but I would say probably the invention of the automobile is probably as important an item as I can think about, because the way that came about was that there used to be, for many years, a lot of horse-drawn carriages. And of course, you need horses for horse-drawn carriages, and that gives you certain limitations to how far you can go and how fast and so forth. And also, you know, it's not so easy for everybody to acquire a horse or ride it and so forth. So the automobile basically came about because of the invention of the steam engine. That might seem strange to you, but it is the fact that the steam engine is the first, I might say, machine, I'm going to call it as a machine, that was invented that basically was then used in order to propel something or in order to produce energy or to confer energy on something. And in the case of automobile, what was needed is something to move the wheels. So if you can have a steam engine mounted on a carriage so that the steam is under pressure, and that pressure is then used to turn an engine, and then the engine is then used to turn the wheels. Then you can see why steam is actually going to be the motive force that causes an automobile to move. And the person that's probably most closely associated with the invention of the automobile is Mr. Benz of Mercedes-Benz fame. He lived and worked in Germany, and he had the idea of putting a steam engine, which was still fairly new, on his carriage to fire the horse, send the horse out to pasture, and use the steam to drive the wheels of this carriage, which was then caused the automobile. It became much more complicated later, but that is the basis. And the interesting thing is his wife rode the first distance with the so-called Benzmobile from one German town to another. And that was the start of the car, the automobile.
Yes, and it's very popular nowadays. Can I say that?
Sure, it is. And of course, there were several people at that time, both in Germany and France, Italy, and in the United States, who were all working on this same idea, so that it wasn't unique to this one person, but he probably is the one most closely associated to realize a car or an automobile that is driven by steam. Of course, later on, other fuels are used, like, of course, diesel fuel or gasoline and so forth. But the first motive method was actually steam. And the steam engine was used for quite a while, even while gasoline was being used. In fact, the modern, the record for speed of an automobile was for quite a while about 100 miles per hour, and that was still made with a steam engine, even at the time that gasoline was also being used in other cars.
Although not a mechanical invention, the introduction of anesthesia in the 19th century revolutionized surgery and medical practice. And I'll tell you, Peter, I can't even imagine how challenging and painful surgery must have been before. And it's hard to think about undergoing such procedures without relief and comfort that modern anesthesia provides. So, speaking of specific interventions that changed our lives, can you talk about the process of discovering penicillin?
Yes, of course. Penicillin, very interesting. A lot of research was being done in many countries, obviously including also in England, about how to where diseases come from and how to do something about them, which was a very slow process. There were also strange ways for people to get alleviated from the problems of diseases, and some really weird things like bloodletting or with leeches and magic people who somehow were able to help people get over sickness by using means that today would consider really unbelievably primitive. But the specifics on penicillin go something like this. There was some work being done in one laboratory that where there were a lot of experiments being carried out for various reasons. And at one point, one of the chemists working there looked somewhere on the windowsill and found there was a mold there. Now, everybody knew about molds. The molds come from on cheeses and various other substances. And molds are represent the activity of some kind of active matter. And he noticed there was a mold on the windowsill, and he noticed that when there was some insects getting close to that mold, they died. That mold was apparently very poisonous to those insects, or whatever there were insects. And so when that was noticed, sort of a light came on and said there must be something in this mold that was developed that is able to kill some kind of cell or some kind of item that should not be at that point, and that causes the plant to die. And when a scientist observes something like that, it gets his obvious attention. And actually, for quite a while, I would say several years, this mold situation was well known, but people didn't seem to know what to do with it and didn't have the equipment or knowledge to analyze it enough to figure out what was really going on. So it took, I don't know whether it's 5 years or 10 years, but maybe even more time than that, before a group of scientists working with the person who had originally seen that mold figure out what is in that, what was in that mold, what is the basis for it, and could we somehow synthesize or duplicate the action so that we don't have to work with molds. That's not going to be a very scalable proposition for curing diseases. So after that, things accelerated pretty rapidly, and not too long after that, some chemists were able to figure out what the actual formula for the active material was, which has carbon atoms and oxygen atoms and sulfur and other items, a very complex molecule. And they were able to figure out what it was, and when they did that, they would be able to figure out how to synthesize that rather than collect it from nature. And from that on, things accelerated pretty rapidly. And it turns out this was just about at the beginning of the Second World War. So it was just in time, because while some other bacterial fighting medicines had been discovered, for example, the sulfur drugs, they were not nearly as effective as penicillin for killing the kinds of germs that cause diseases of various kinds, like sepsis and syphilis and the various other things like that. And so during the middle to end of the Second World War, the inventors contacted pharmaceutical companies and showed them what they had, and then the pharmaceutical companies, knowing how to ferment things and making certain kinds of compounds, were able to synthesize penicillin, you might say almost in the last year of the Second World War, so that some of the penicillin was available just before the end of the war.
And it's amazing, Peter, how many groundbreaking inventions have resulted from unexpected accidents. Yeah.
You read about the microwave oven, didn't you?
Yes, but can you tell us the story about the microwave?
To me, that's one of the most interesting ones, because people can really identify, like, picture it. So during the Blitz in London during the Second World War, where the German planes were bombing London, and the airmen, well, the soldiers on the ground had to try to shoot down those airplanes so they wouldn't release their bombs over London. And to shoot them down, something had just recently been discovered called radar, which was sort of a gun that shoots some rays into the air. And they would, there was a piece of equipment, it's almost like a gun, but instead of shooting bullets, it shoots rays. And it shot these waves or rays at planes, and were able to shoot some of those planes down that way. In fact, quite a bit of them. And that was a wonderful invention. But one day, one of the people working there for a company called Raytheon, which was actually a U.S. company, shooting down those German Messerschmitt planes, accidentally aimed that gun at his colleague's body or pants, and ended up melting a candy bar that he had in his pocket. And because this is not just a ray, but it's also a very hot kind of ray or wave. And this candy bar basically totally melted and ran down the person's leg. And so they looked at this thing and said, there's something going on here that we don't understand.
Yeah.
All I know is that this ray is heating something up very rapidly. And there must be some use for this, but we can't really think too hard what it might be. And this was still the war. But the persons who were there, and a couple of people there also, as well as their bosses, started thinking, well, there must be some civilian kind of use for this heating method, because I mean, up to that point, if you wanted to heat something for cooking, for example, you need to have a fuel. You need to have wood or kerosene or diesel oil, whatever it is. And this was a ray gun that heated something up. So they said to themselves, well, maybe there is some way of designing some kind of an equipment, some kind of an oven where you could use this kind of ray to heat up some food, not necessarily to, like a real steak being heated on top of a stove range, but just some kind of a box where you put some food and you put that ray on the food, and the food would would heat up or even would melt, and you had to be very careful. Well, that's the basis of ultimately a microwave oven. The only problem was that the company Raytheon was a defense contractor and had absolutely no background in making utilities for kitchens. I mean, they were building airplanes, not refrigerators or whatever. So how do we get this thing to the market? How do we even make the equipment? I have no idea. And they said, well, we've got to find a company that makes makes some kind of appliance for a kitchen. So the company, which was a large company, acquired a company called Amano, which was the main producer or manufacturer of home refrigerators. And they said, here, we got something that heats something in a box. Can you figure out how we can make a useful home appliance with that? And you're going to picture the rest. It took several more years, including some help from Japan with some specific electronic equipment. But within when the acquisition of that Amana company was made, within less than a decade, there were 1 million of these units sold worldwide. So it all came from melting a candy bar. Interesting.
Interesting, and it's so useful. It made our lives so more easy. Yes, just go and heat your food in 2 minutes and it's ready. But Peter, I'm curious about your book and our listeners, our audience as well. So what inspired you to write this book? Was there any reason?
Well, a little bit. This was actually my fourth book. I had by that time written 3 books, which were largely about the chemical industry.
Mhm.
And I had founded a company called Chem Systems, which was a consulting firm in the chemical field, or energy, chemical and energy field, excuse me. And we had an office in London, and I spent a lot of time in England because we had a big office there and a lot of business to. And I traveled quite a bit, either with myself or with other people, or with my wife, Hilda. And we spent some time, not just in London, but in parts of England that were very fascinating to us, and which we knew had been an area where the Industrial Revolution had pretty much taken place. The birth of the Industrial Revolution was in the middle part of England, in an area where they have a lot of coal, particularly coal that's easily mined. And I found out quite a bit about the Industrial Revolution and about the inventions that were made. And at that time, it was just information I picked up, and it's kind of, I'm interested in things, I'm interested in finding out about things. And I had known about some of these inventors, I knew their names, but I thought to myself, well, I'm kind of a little tired of writing about chemicals. This is such an interesting subject that the Industrial Revolution was so important to mankind, to all of us, that to write a book about, not just about the inventors, which a lot of people have been written about, but about how these inventions really not just came about and be based and received prizes and so forth, but how these inventions affected our modern life. And that I did some research work, and I concluded that there really didn't seem to be any books that went to that kind of approach, saying, let's take a look at the balloon up there that let's say it's a blimp that's carried the Goodyear name, and this is a blimp that's over the countryside. How did this come about? Who is the inventor of that? I mean, how long ago have there been blimps? And I started thinking about balloons and so forth, and I realized that the first balloons really came about around 200 years ago. And so from invention to invention, it just became quite reasonable to pick out a certain number and take them from the time of invention to the present. And we ended up with 25 chapters in the book.
25 chapters.
Right.
And how was this research? For example, how long did it take for you to write this book? Because I'm sure you had to research a lot, although this was kind of your profession. You are a scientist.
Well, I'm going to surprise you maybe by saying that I found this book not that difficult to research and to write about, because and we have to thank all the modern equipment we have today to do research work. Obviously, the computer, and there's something called Wikipedia, which you may or may have used. Are you familiar with it? Wikipedia,
Yeah.
which is sort of a computer kind of a book that you can look things up. In this particular case, if you want to look at certain inventors or inventions, in Wikipedia, it doesn't take a long time to find descriptions, background and history that might have about anywhere from 10 to 100 pages. But if you do your research carefully, it's all there. And the good news is these chapters are only about 1,000 or 1,500 words. And I found it's not that difficult to put that together. And I've probably left out a lot of important stuff, but if you have a size limitation, there's only so much you can put in. So I think that in the case of those 25 inventions, I was able to put a pretty consistent, pretty interesting story together, even though it doesn't have the kind of scope that a long article in Wikipedia or elsewhere. There's another thing called Britannica in England that has somewhat similar capabilities. So the research to me was very interesting, and I was able to do it pretty much by myself. I used a lady I know very well in Texas with whom I used to work when I was still running my company. And she was very, very good at editing and on the computer. And she helped me a lot with, let's say, with editing the material and putting it together and doing some proofreading and so forth. So I didn't need a lot of help. I did it pretty much by myself.
Congratulations, Peter, for your fourth book. Yeah, it's the fourth one. And what do you hope your readers take away from your book?
I think it's a very useful reference, not just for adults, but for younger people. They're surrounded by all these conveniences we use in life. And I think if kids, and particularly kids with the kind of, when I say STEM, you know, the STEM interests, which is, do you know what STEM stands for, right? It's science, technology, etc. If they have a sense of intellectual curiosity, and they think, okay, I'm plugging something in here. This is an electric outlet. I want to plug it in. What is electricity? What really is it? I don't really have any idea what it is. All I know is when I plug this in, the lamp starts glowing or the motor starts turning. What is it? Is it something that flows in a wire? Or how is it made? How is it generated? And I think my book is very useful in giving fairly quick answers to these questions compared to buying or renting or whatever it is, a 300-page book called Electricity. And what is a person supposed to do with that? Spend a huge amount of time. I think by reading a chapter I have on electricity or on automobiles, on penicillin we talked about, or even on the three M posted stickers. I remember that's in the book too. That was one of the great inventions was made by the 3M company. How did this come about? Again, there's these fascinating stories about most of these inventions. So what do they get out of it? Well, I think it's a good reference for a lot of things. And I think a lot of people should think back. Do I really know and as much as I'd like to know? For example, take something like natural gas. We take natural gas for granted. We talk about it all the time. We talk about being discovered. We talk about fracking, about all kinds of stuff like that. What do we really know? Where does natural gas come from? How come we have natural gas piped into our homes? Where is it coming from? And in about, say, about 5 or 6 pages, they would sure find out where it came from and how the original use of natural gas came about. And I guess that's my answer. It's a reference that's easy to use and friendly and doesn't need a huge amount of technical knowledge to understand.
And we can learn in an easy way because it's everything in the same book. Peter, what advice would you give to young inventors today?
That's difficult. I think, first of all, why do people become inventors? And what barriers are there for becoming an inventor? And I think a lot of people today would say, well, everything that's really important that we use has already been invented. What can I really invent that is going to make me famous and make me a lot of money? And I don't think I have a good answer to that. I think the main approach or the main way of looking at this thing for anybody is to say, I'm the kind of person that likes to solve problems, to solve puzzles, and to figure out how things work, and to question whether things that are being done cannot be done better than they're being done right now. And it's quite true, and that is really still true. I mean, people do things during the day and don't question why are we doing it this way? And I guarantee you, many of the most important inventions have come about mainly because somebody sat down and said, what can we do to make this better? And I don't know how much time we have, but I would say one of the best things I proved to was happened at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Because in the coal mines, the miners go down into the mine shafts with some tools, axes and so forth, crowbars, whatever, and they hack along the coal, and now you have pieces of coal down there in the bottom of the well, and you have to get the coal up. And it's not the easiest thing. It might be about 30 or 50 or 100 feet down. And how do you get this coal up? Okay, well, you put it in a bucket. Now you have to have somebody to pull the bucket up. So somebody up on top on the land, several people, and if it's a big bucket and a lot of coal, you have to get a horse and some pulleys and get the horse to pull up the coal bucket, right? And think about that. That was basically the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. How do I get this coal up and how do I get it to the market? And the answer was to invent the steam engine because people, actually before the steam engine, they realized there were some coal mines that were very close to a river or to a fairly big brook. And there were always some water wheels that were turning with the water coming down and turning the wheel, right? A water wheel is very obvious. Well, a water wheel, if it's connected to something, it can raise something because by using some gears, you can get the power of the water to raise something. And so they found out they could raise some coal buckets by building something right next to a river and using the force of the water to raise those buckets of coal. And when they saw how well that worked, then somebody came along and said, yeah, but steam has a lot more power than water does. If you enclose steam, you get a high pressure. I want to use high pressure steam to turn those things. And that was the steam engine. And that was the actual true beginning of the Industrial Revolution.
A lot of history. I'm learning so much with you today. And
Did that make sense to you?
yes, of course. Although this is not my forte, but of course it makes a lot of sense. And
I mean,
Peter,
it's not high technology, right? To use horses or water to move something or steam.
exactly. And Peter, where can our audience find you and your book online?
My website is called peterspitzbooks.com. So the URL is this, this whole thing, HTTP, Peter Spitz Books. That is my website. So anybody can get on that. And of course, my book is now being sold at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other places like that.
Okay, great. And Peter, I want to say thank you so much for your great work and for sharing it with us today. I hope you keep writing, more things come for you. And for our listeners, Peter is featured in the Relatable Voice magazine in September. So grab your free copy at www.relatable-media.com and you can learn more about Peter and
I
his
will
work.
definitely look forward to it, and I enjoy talking to you tremendously.
Thank you, Peter. Come back.
I hope to, and thank you for interviewing me.